Picture this. You're the most powerful man in Jerusalem. With a single word, you can save or condemn anyone. But today, standing before you is a man who claims to be the Son of God. The crowd screams for his blood. Your wife begs you to spare him after a terrifying dream. Your political career hangs in the balance. What do? This is the impossible choice that destroyed Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who signed the death warrant of Jesus Christ. But here's what history forgot to tell you. His story didn't end with the crucifixion. What happened next was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most haunting tales, the complete, untold story of the man whose single decision changed the world forever and how it ultimately consumed him from the inside out. Pontius Pilate wasn't born to be a villain. He was a product of the Roman machine, efficient, calculating, ambitious. When Emperor Tiberius appointed him as the 5th prefect of Judea in 26 AD, Pilate thought he had hit the political jackpot. Judea was a stepping stone to greater things, a chance to prove himself worthy of higher office in Rome. But Judea was no ordinary province. It was a powder keg of religious fervor, political tension, and ancient grudges. The Jews were unlike any people Rome had conquered. They refused to bow to Roman gods. They clung to their monotheistic beliefs with terrifying intensity, and they saw every Roman policy as an attack on their very souls. From day one, Pilate struggled. His first major blunder came when he brought Roman standards bearing the emperor's image into Jerusalem, an act that the Jews considered blasphemous idolatry. Thousands surrounded his residence for days, willing to die rather than accept this desecration. When Pilate threatened them with death, they bared their necks, ready for martyrdom. This was Pilate's first taste of Jewish determination, and it rattled him to his core. Then came the aqueduct controversy. Pilate needed to improve Jerusalem's water supply, a genuinely good idea, but he funded it using money from the temple treasury sacred funds that the Jews believed belonged to God alone. The resulting riots were so violent that Pilate's soldiers had to disguise themselves as civilians and beat protesters with clubs, killing many in the process. Each incident chipped away at Pilate's confidence. He was losing control of a province that was supposed to be his pathway to glory. The Jewish leaders were constantly challenging his authority, and reports of his harsh methods were reaching Rome. Emperor Tiberius was known for his paranoia and his tendency to execute governors who caused too much trouble. Pilate was walking a tightrope between Jewish demands and Roman expectations, and he was starting to slip. Then Jesus appeared. At first, he was just another Jewish preacher in a land full of them. But this one was different. Crowds followed him everywhere. He spoke with an authority that made hardened centurions pause. He performed healings that defied explanation. Most dangerously of all, people were calling him the Messiah, the prophesied king who would liberate the Jews from Roman rule. For Pilate, Jesus represented everything he feared most, a charismatic leader who could unite the fractured Jewish population against Rome. But when the religious authorities brought Jesus to him that fateful Friday morning, Pilate found himself face to face with something he never expected. The man standing before him wasn't a fiery revolutionary. Jesus was calm, dignified, almost otherworldly in his composure. When Pilate asked him directly, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus' response sent chills down the governor's spine. "My kingdom is not of this world." This wasn't the answer of a political rebel. This was something else entirely. As Pilate wrestled with what to do, a message arrived that would haunt him forever. His wife, Claudia Procula, had experienced a vivid, terrifying dream about Jesus. The message she sent was brief but desperate. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Roman culture took dreams seriously, especially those experienced by women, who were believed to be more sensitive to divine messages. But this wasn't just any dream, it was a nightmare so intense that Claudia was still suffering from it hours later. What did she see in that dream? Historical accounts don't specify, but they suggest it was a vision of divine judgment, of cosmic consequences that would follow if Jesus was condemned. Some traditions claim she saw the temple veil tearing, darkness covering the earth, and dead saints rising from their graves. Whatever she witnessed in that dream, It terrified her enough to risk interfering in her husband's official duties, something Roman wives rarely did. Her warning added another layer of pressure to Pilate's already impossible situation. The trial itself was a masterclass in political manipulation and moral cowardice. Pilate tried everything to avoid making a decision. He sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, hoping to pass the responsibility to someone else. When that failed, he offered to release Jesus as part of the traditional Passover amnesty, pitting him against Barabbas, a known terrorist and murderer. But the crowd, orchestrated by the religious leaders, chose Barabbas. The people who had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem just days earlier were now screaming for his death. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" they chanted with bloodthirsty fervor. Pilate's desperation was palpable. He publicly washed his hands, declaring, "I am innocent of this man's blood, see to it yourselves." But as the water ran off his fingers, he must have known that no amount of symbolic cleansing could wash away what he was about to do. The irony was devastating. The man who prided himself on Roman law and order was about to execute someone he knew was innocent simply to maintain order. The system he served had corrupted him completely. The crucifixion of Jesus was unlike any execution Pilate had overseen. From the moment Jesus was nailed to the cross, strange things began happening. The sky darkened at noon, as if nature itself was mourning. The earth shook. The veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, something no human hand could have done. But it was Jesus' words from the cross that truly shattered Pilate's composure. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Here was a man dying in agony, and instead of cursing his executioners, he was praying for their forgiveness. This wasn't normal. This wasn't human. When the centurion in charge of the execution, a hardened soldier who had overseen countless crucifixions, declared, "Truly this was the Son of God," Pilate felt the first cracks in his sanity. 3 days later, the guards came running from the tomb, their faces white with terror. They babbled about angels, about blinding light, about the stone being rolled away by invisible hands. Jesus' body was gone, and no amount of bribes or threats could produce a credible explanation for what had happened. The resurrection reports spread like wildfire. If Jesus had truly risen from the dead, then Pilate hadn't just executed an innocent man, he had killed the Son of God. From that day forward, Pilate was a changed man. Those who served in his household reported that he would pace his chambers at night, muttering to himself. He barely ate, rarely slept, and when he did sleep, he would wake screaming from nightmares. The guilt was eating him alive. Every decision he made was now filtered through the lens of that one terrible choice. He second-guessed himself constantly, paralyzed by the fear of making another catastrophic mistake. His wife Claudia fared no better. The nightmares that had started with her prophetic dream never stopped. She became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in prayer to God she wasn't sure existed anymore. Some accounts suggest she secretly converted to Christianity, unable to reconcile what she had witnessed with her pagan beliefs. Meanwhile, the Christian movement was exploding across the Roman Empire. Everywhere Pilate looked, he saw reminders of what he had done. The followers of Jesus weren't going away, they were multiplying, spreading the story of the crucifixion and resurrection to anyone who would listen. Pilate's mental deterioration affected his ability to govern. His decision-making became erratic, his responses to Jewish complaints increasingly brutal and inappropriate. The delicate balance he had once maintained between Roman authority and Jewish sensibilities completely collapsed. The final straw came with the Samaritan incident at Mount Gerizim. A Samaritan prophet had promised to reveal sacred vessels that Moses had supposedly hidden on the mountain. When a large crowd gathered, Pilate overreacted, sending in troops who massacred the assembly. The Samaritans complained to Lucius Vitellius, the governor of Syria and Pilate's superior. This time, there would be no political protection. Vitellius ordered Pilate to return to Rome immediately to face Emperor Tiberius and answer for his conduct. After 10 years of increasingly troubled governance, Pilate's career was over. The man who had once held the power of life and death over Jesus now found himself powerless. Summoned to face judgment in Rome like a common criminal, the journey back to Rome must have been agonizing for Pilate. Every mile took him closer to an uncertain fate, and away from the only world where he had ever held real power. But perhaps worse than the fear of what awaited him in Rome was the knowledge that he could never escape what he had done in Jerusalem. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had judged Jesus was now being judged himself. The wheel of justice was turning, and Pilate found himself on the receiving end of imperial wrath. When he finally arrived in Rome, he discovered that Emperor Tiberius had died while he was en route. Caligula, the new emperor, was even more unpredictable and dangerous than his predecessor. Some historical accounts suggest that Caligula was initially inclined to be lenient with Pilate, but the weight of evidence against the former governor was overwhelming. Instead of execution, Pilate received a punishment that may have been worse: exile. He was stripped of all rank and property and banished to Gaul, modern-day France, far from the centers of Roman power and civilization. For a man who had lived for political advancement and social status, this was a kind of living death. In exile, Pilate had nothing but time to think about what he had done. The isolation was crushing. He had no friends, no allies, no purpose. The man who had once commanded legions now commanded nothing and no one. Historical accounts from this period describe a broken man, prematurely aged by guilt and regret. He would spend hours staring into space, lost in memories of that terrible Friday morning when he had condemned the Son of God to death. Claudia, if she accompanied him into exile, was no comfort. Her own guilt over failing to prevent the crucifixion had consumed her. Some traditions suggest that she died in exile, unable to bear the weight of what had happened. As the years passed, Pilate's mental state continued to deteriorate. The guilt that had started as a gnawing anxiety had grown into full-blown madness. He saw Jesus everywhere, in crowds, in shadows, in his dreams. The face of the man he had condemned haunted every waking moment. Christian communities were growing throughout the empire, and their message of forgiveness might have offered Pilate some comfort. But he couldn't bring himself to believe that God could forgive what he had done. The man who had washed his hands to symbolically cleanse himself of responsibility now found that no amount of repentance could wash away his guilt. Some accounts suggest that Pilate did eventually convert to Christianity, recognizing Jesus as the Son of God he had crucified. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church even venerates him as a saint based on traditions that he repented and was baptized before his death. But these accounts are disputed, and they may represent wishful thinking rather than historical fact. The exact circumstances of Pilate's death remain one of history's great mysteries. The most commonly accepted account comes from Eusebius of Caesarea, who wrote that Pilate committed suicide during the reign of Caligula, overwhelmed by guilt and despair. According to this tradition, Pilate could no longer bear the weight of what he had done. The man who had tried to wash his hands of responsibility for Jesus' death finally took responsibility in the most final way possible. Other accounts suggest different endings. Some say he was executed by Caligula for his failures as governor. Others claim he died of natural causes, but that his death was accompanied by supernatural phenomena, storms, earthquakes, and other signs of divine displeasure. Medieval legends elaborated on his death, claiming that his body was thrown into the Tiber River in Rome, but that it caused such terrible storms that it had to be removed and cast into a lake in the Alps. Even in death, according to these stories, Pilate brought chaos and destruction wherever he went. Whether he died by suicide, execution, or natural causes, Pilate's death marked the end of one of history's most tragic figures. But his story didn't end with his death. In many ways, it was just beginning. In Christian tradition, Pilate became the ultimate symbol of moral cowardice and the dangers of political expediency. His name was included in the Nicene Creed, suffered under Pontius Pilate, ensuring that every Christian would remember him until the end of time. But he also became something else, a mirror for human weakness and the capacity for redemption. His story asks the question that haunts every human conscience: what would you have done in his place? The story of Pontius Pilate is ultimately a story about choice and consequence. He was given the opportunity to make the right decision, to stand up for justice, to protect the innocent, to resist the crowd's demands for blood. Instead, he chose the path of political expedience, and it destroyed him. But perhaps that's too simple. Pilate was trapped in an impossible situation, caught between competing demands that no decision could satisfy. He was a product of his time and culture, trying to navigate forces beyond his control or understanding. The haunting question remains: if we had been in Pilate's position, facing the same pressures and the same impossible choice, what would we have done? Would we have had the courage to stand up for what was right, even if it meant sacrificing our careers, our security, our lives? Pilate's story forces us to confront our own capacity for moral compromise. In our daily lives, we face smaller versions of his dilemma. Moments when we must choose between doing what's right and doing what's easy, between standing up for the truth and going along with the crowd. The man who condemned Jesus Christ serves as an eternal warning about the price of moral cowardice. But he also offers hope, because if redemption was possible, even for Pontius Pilate, then perhaps it's possible for all of us. His story continues to resonate across the centuries because it's ultimately our story too. We all have the capacity for both great evil and great good. The choice, as it was for Pilate, is ours to make. The haunting fate of Pontius Pilate reminds us that our decisions have consequences that echo through eternity. In the end, we all must answer for what we do when faced with the choice between justice and convenience, between courage and cowardice, between truth and expedience. What will your choice be?